who are looking at our phones know that the Senate has passed the bill under unanimous consent. We're going to have a moment of silence, but I think we should just have a moment of celebration.
Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring celebrating the Senate's passage of the bill, forcing the release of more files connected to the late sex offender. Now, the question will be, will the Justice Department actually provide all of the documents, or will it hold some back, citing ongoing investigations? We'll dig into that. Plus, we'll show you the big moments from yesterday's White House visit for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That meeting came despite his ties to the murder of a Washington Post columnist, prompting a response from President Trump. Quote, "Things happen." Plus, a Trump-appointed judge has blocked the Republican-drawn congressional map in Texas. We'll look at whether the Supreme Court will decide on the case in time for next year's midterm elections. There is so much going on. Good morning.
So much to talk about.
Welcome to Morning Joe. It's Wednesday, November 19th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the co-host of our 9 a.m. hour, staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin.
Morning.
Just rolling in.
Morning.
Right on time. MS Now senior congressional reporter and host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, stays with us, and CEO and co-founder of Axios, Jim Vandehei, is here as well. Good to have you all.
We got a lot of talk about. I mean, too much, As they say in Northwest Florida, trying to fit, 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that.
Sugar.
Really hard to do that. First of all, just going down the list, here you have a Trump-appointed judge in Texas being part of a panel that throws out the Texas redistricting, right? And this is what they write. I think it's very, very telling. According to Judge Brown's opinion, quote, "It's challenging to unpack the DOJ letter because it contains so many factual, legal, and typographical errors. Even the attorneys employed by the Texas Attorney General, who profess to be a political ally of the Trump administration, described the DOJ letter as legally unsound, baseless, erroneous, ham-fisted, and a mess."
But besides that, it was fine.
Other than that, it's fine. And that's a Trump-appointed judge who's writing that. And again, it goes to the sheer incompetence up and down the appointees. People didn't say that about a lot of people appointed by Donald Trump the first term, but he's deliberately gotten people who are lackeys, who aren't talented, who don't know what they're doing. And we see this time and again. And what's the impact? When he's building a skyscraper, he gets people that are going to build a skyscraper that doesn't collapse. Why does he think he can get the worst people, the least talented people, to run the most complicated and most powerful government in the world? I mean, because the consequences, who does he hurt? Here, the Democrats are cheering that he's got one incompetent lawyer after another incompetent lawyer after another incompetent lawyer running things at the Justice Department, and it hurts him in the end. I keep saying this. I'm so tired of saying this. Getting stupid people hurts you in the end.
The litmus test is loyalty in this second term. Are you loyal to Donald Trump? Period. Full stop. That goes if you're running the Department of Defense, or now these lawyers that are appointed across the Justice Department. We talked yesterday about Lindsey Halligan and the mess of the Comey case, where James Comey now has a list of options to get himself and get that case thrown out because of the way it's been prosecuted. And now in Texas, as you say, this isn't just about being good for Donald Trump or being bad for Donald Trump. This is bad for Republicans who put so many eggs in this basket, invested so much in Texas to reshape the map and thereby reshape the House of Representatives, setting off this kind of arms race now in California and across the country. If that falls apart, what's going to happen to their other cases across the country?
They lose 5. California picks up 5.
Right.
Utah picks up 1. Again, this whole incompetent exercise ends up blowing up in their face politically. And again, it started by a misreading of a prior decision. Again, the incompetence. There are actually more important things than just 100% loyalty, and that's actual competence. And you're seeing it up and down the administration. And Jim Vandehei, I mean, let's go over a checklist. So who did he have last night? He had a guy that, again, he doesn't like talking about it, but a guy who chopped up, called for the chopping up of of Washington Post columnist. Washington Post didn't take his "things happen" comment very kindly last night, and their head editorial headline is "Things Happen," which is what he said when was asked, well, what do you think about the fact that, he's been found to have chopped up this journalist? Things happen, he says. But you look at that at a time when Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling him a traitor, saying he's worried about foreign governments. He's worrying about himself, but not worrying about the people. And here you have, I think, worst timing ever, a state dinner with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, while the one piece of legislation that's passed with bipartisan support that he will sign is a piece of legislation.
Oh, my God.
He didn't want passed, and files released that he doesn't want released.
Yeah, it's. I want to get back to competence in a second, but if you're in MAGA and you're America first, what the hell are you thinking today? You're watching the fact that you have the White House and Congress. The only thing that they've done in the last 2 months is vote to release the Epstein files over the objection of the president, who didn't want any of the files to be released in the first place. Nothing else. Then you put next to that the fact that you have a quasi-state dinner with the Saudis. Now remember, it was the Saudis who were on the airplane that crashed into our towers, killing 3,000 Americans. That's just a fact. It is also a fact that the journalist that he was deriding when he was talking to the press yesterday was sawed into pieces, and the CIA under Trump had a report that linked it pretty directly to at least the Crown Prince being aware of it. And you have him talking to the Saudis about getting deals from us where we're going to let them have our F-35s on their soil. We're going to give them access to our AI technology when the Saudis themselves have said, hey, listen, what we don't get from you, we're going to get from China, which might mean that if we give you something, you might be able to backdoor it to China yourself. Those are not disputable things. They are just absolute facts. And so one of the reasons that you have the activist wing of MAGA so upset is they're like, this isn't what we paid for. This isn't what we voted for. This isn't what we asked for. And your competence thing is another thing that if you're a Republican, you got to start to boil at some point, because you've got nirvana. You've got as much power as I've ever seen vested in one party at one time in one city. And yet, if you look at the number of laws actually being signed, the things that will outlast the short-term deals, very few of them. And then you look at the polling and you look at that working class white voter who puts you into office, and they're frustrated, top to down. We've talked about this every time I'm on the show. Every issue that they care about, including things being really expensive and them being very worried about whether they're going to get a job or their kid's going to get out of college and enter the worst job market that we've seen in 5 or 10 years, not even really discussed. And it does come down to competence. If you have the right people doing the right work at the right time, you get really good results. That's like the trick of leading anything, running a company, running a government.
Well, and John Lemire, I mean, let's talk about when Mary Bruce at ABC asks a question that feeds off of what Trump's own CIA concluded in his first term, that Khashoggi was chopped up, tortured and chopped up at the knowledge or direction of the guy that he was praising yesterday. Now, listen, if you want to say we work with very bad people and it's time to move on, people have made that calculation. They just have. Maybe people don't like that calculation's been made. But to attack a lawyer and tell her, now get this, get this. He's sitting next to a man who was responsible for the sawing up of a reporter. And then he calls an ABC News reporter insubordinate. Think about that.
There was a time when the American president, whoever it was, no matter which party, would try to be an example for the rest of the world in terms of human rights, in terms of freedom of the press. And that is something that this president has never been interested in doing. He's cozying up to power, authoritarians, and the like. And yesterday, his response to that ABC reporter was, as noted, things happen. a bone saw happened. That's what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. He was chopped up with a bone saw at least the knowledge and perhaps at the instruction of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He then went the president went on to say there's some people who didn't like Jamal Khashoggi, sort of suggested that maybe he had it coming, that some people disagreed with him. And then to fet him at another opulent state dinner in all but name last night, described as the glitziest event that he has thrown for any leader so far this year. The most lavish event the White House has held so far this year, and we're seeing images of it now, was last night in the honor of MBS, a problematic ally to say the least. And we have, again, this president using a moment with the eyes of the world on him to side, to turn away from what would be considered traditional values of the office.
And J. Mart, this all comes with the background. Amika's going to get into the news in a minute here of Donald Trump being rolled for the first time in an extraordinarily dramatic way by Republicans in the House and the Senate.
And by backbenchers, frankly. I mean, look, no offense to Thomas Massey, but he's somebody who's sort of been a bit of a bomb thrower, not somebody who was sort of the modern Sam Rayburn there necessarily. Yeah. And he basically said, I got the votes, man. And once that was clear, Trump had no choice but to fold. Think about the timing of this. So 2 weeks ago, up and down the ballot, coast to coast, the Republican Party loses every election decisively. Even the White House gets the message. Okay, inflation's still a problem. We got to do something. Let's have DOJ go after the meat packers. Maybe we got to rescind the tariffs on coffee and bananas and some other stuff. We're going to have Trump talk about it more. Promise. 2 weeks later, to the night, 2 weeks later, they got one more foreign leader coming through Washington for one more grip and grin, and then they have this lavish state dinner. Talk about not getting the message, right? The voters say, why aren't you focused on us, man? And 2 weeks later, what are they doing? They're once again focused on foreign policy, some other country. Who are these folks here? Who is this guy?
The Saudis. I mean, it's not like
we're the 9/11 country, or the Brits, or the French, one of our allies traditionally. I just think it contradicts the message from 2 weeks ago, and it shows that Trump is going to do what he wants to do. And what does he want to do? He wants to sort of buddy up with these folks. He wants to enjoy the trappings of the office, and as long as you can't change that, you can't change the fundamental political challenge this White House has.
Well, it's quite a parallel yesterday while the White House was preparing for that dinner with overwhelming support in both chambers of Congress. Legislation that will require the Justice Department to release all of its records related to Jeffrey Epstein will soon land on President Trump's desk, where he has said he will sign it. The measure moved quickly through Capitol Hill yesterday, starting in the House, where lawmakers approved it in a near unanimous vote, 427-1. The lone no vote came from Republican Congressman Clay Higgins of Louisiana, citing privacy concerns for people who may be identified in the documents, specifically witnesses, people who provided alibis, and victims' family members. House Speaker Mike Johnson has echoed those concerns despite voting for the bill himself. Just a few hours later, the Senate unanimously agreed to pass the legislation once it arrives in the upper chamber, which is expected this morning. A senior White House official tells MS Now the president will then sign it whenever it gets to the White House. But as the Epstein Files bill makes its way to President Trump's desk, he continues to brand the issue as a distraction and a hoax. Shortly before the Senate lined up to back the legislation last night, the president posted on social media that he did not care when the chamber passed the bill, as long as Republicans don't, quote, take their eyes off all the victories we have had. And earlier yesterday in the Oval Office, he once again sought to distance himself from his former friend and highlight Jeffrey Epstein's ties to Democrats.
You just keep going on the Epstein files. And what the Epstein is a Democrat hoax to try and get me not to be able to talk about the $21 trillion that I talked about today. It's a hoax. Now, I just got a little report, and I put it in my pocket, of all the money that he's given to Democrats. He gave me none, zero, no money to me, but he gave money to Democrats.
Well, of course, every time he says that, all he sees is evidence of his close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, of things him saying positively in magazine articles about his good friend Jeffrey Epstein, of him dancing and hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. So again, even him doing that invites blowback that he doesn't want. So I'm not exactly sure why he keeps saying things when, again, his own MAGA base isn't going to go, oh, that's a left-wing media hoax. They can't do that. Why can't they do that? Because they're the ones who've been pushing for the release of the Epstein files, while Democrats during the Biden term were going, duh, what? Didn't say a word then. It was the MAGA folks who have been pushing this. So when he insults people for pushing for these files to be released, he's insulting his own base.
Yeah, look, the call has always been coming from inside the House on this one, right? It's why the White House is about face in the first place. When they first started saying they wouldn't have more transparency on the Epstein files was so stunning and landed like a rock on Capitol Hill among people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are like, wait a second, what? I've always been part of this movement. I thought that this was part and parcel to what we were doing here, draining the swamp, lifting the veil off of the cabal that they've so long talked about in Washington and in the powerful echelons of society. This cuts so counter to the Trump movement from the very day that Lemire and I started covering it in early 2015. The idea that these were the outsiders coming in to shine a light on all of the insiders and the insidiousness of Washington and powerful circles. This really cuts against that. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in is when this bill actually gets transmitted, because the Speaker of the House was very clear that he had issues with this bill. Thune really cut him off at the pass and said, well, with a vote like 427-1, why would we do any amendments? We talked to the lawyers. Doesn't sound like we have any privacy concerns. So that's him bucking the Speaker. But then the Speaker, after he came back from that non-state dinner last night, said that he talked to the president about this bill. And this is what he told our team. He said, we both have concerns about it. So we'll see if Trump is supportive. And then he says, I was standing there with the Crown Prince. We couldn't talk. But he doesn't take off the table the idea that maybe there's a veto or something in here. So we have to see actually what the day unfolds with, because the White House has said that Trump would sign this bill, but it hasn't been transmitted yet. And the Speaker is clearly still very angry about the changes he wanted that weren't made by the Senate. So this is a bit of a live ball for us to see what actually happens. It could be it's nothing. It also could be that there's a bump in the road.
And Congressman Massey actually echoed his concern again last night that at the 11th hour, you could have the president or someone else saying, wait a minute, we can't release the files because there's an active investigation. So that is still in play and still out there, despite that overwhelming vote we saw last night. So Jim Vandehei, you look at President Trump yesterday, the moments when he, as the kids would say, really crashed out, talking to a reporter, Mary Bruce in that case, and another on a Air Force One the other day.
What did the kids say?
He's crashing out right
crashing
now.
out, so
he's in a tailspin. Yeah.
Okay,
he crashed out.
When I hear that at like 9:25,
it's not good.
Okay.
But and then we heard Jim Vandehei, the president, a few days ago, with just a despicable exchange with a reporter on Air Force One when asked about the Epstein files and some of the emails that were made public the other day. This obviously is something that Donald Trump didn't want to be made public, saw the writing on the wall on Sunday night and said, okay, I've got to get behind this and pretend I've been behind it all along. What do you think is the impact? We don't know what's going to be in these files, but what happens when they are released?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical that we're going to see a lot of new information that gets released. Remember, the Justice Department, both under Biden and under Trump, has been sitting on all of these documents. And there's a lot of people internally in both administrations who had a heavy incentive to get the worst stuff out, particularly if they wanted to move the investigation along. And by the way, I think there's a lot of innuendo in there, and there's going to be a legal justification to black out a lot of information that might be very tawdry, but is not illegal. So I wouldn't think you're going to suddenly get this amazing new portrait of all the grossness around Epstein and the people who affiliated with him. On the question about Trump and reporters, again, we do become immune to this a little bit, but give me a break. You're the president of the United States, and a woman asks you a question and you call her a frickin' piggy? Like, in what world is that okay? If I did that as a CEO of my company, I should probably lose my job. I certainly should not be trusted by anybody around because it's so damn disrespectful. And that question, and if you go back and roll the tape on the question where he said, that's so rude, you're so insubordinate, it wasn't even that interesting of a question. It was a question anybody would ask. It was asked in a totally neutral tone. There was no anger in it. Anybody who's skeptical, who just, oh, I hate the media, just go watch it yourself. Your eyes aren't going to lie. Look at it. And did that seem like a reasonable question? And then did it seem like a reasonable response? If it was a reasonable question and it was an unreasonable response, why? Well, I'm guessing that those questions are starting to get under the president's skin because it's basically a controversy of his own making. He created the Frankenstein that created the Epstein obsession. in, and they won't let it go, and he won't let it go, and now it continues to haunt him, and it makes it almost impossible for them to do what J Mart was talking about, which is right. You don't have to be some political Svengali to look at what happened 2 weeks ago and say, geez, what should I do? I don't know. Maybe you should focus on prices, the economy, jobs, get an anxious public feeling a little bit more confident, feel like you're putting your emphasis into getting the economy in a good place where if AI comes as quickly as people think it is, that everybody can benefit from it. When you're not doing that, people sour on you. And when people sour on you broadly, it's a signal to your base that little by little, they can start to question you. They can start to maybe put a little pressure on you. And that's what you're seeing happen within MAGA. And that is a very, very significant change. This was a 100% total loyalty movement that is no longer 100% total loyalty, and that has political consequences.
And by the way, for anybody that does go back and looks in the MAGA base at those questions, they will see that Mary Bruce and the Bloomberg reporter were only asking the questions that they have demanded be answered for years now.
House Democrats and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, they're cheering yesterday as they learned the House agreed to pass the Epstein Files transparency bill. The Senate then passed it by unanimous consent quite quickly, I would add, and it will head to President's desk in theory sometime this morning. It comes after he spent months voicing opposition to this measure. Want to bring in now the woman you just saw in that clip, Democratic Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez of New Mexico. She's the chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. That's who hosted that vigil last night. It's why you were front and center. I wonder if you can talk about, because you've had so many conversations with the survivors. They have been advocating for this, not just for months on Capitol Hill, but for years trying to get justice. What were the reactions that you heard from them? What do they hope happens next?
So good morning, and thank you for having me. But thank you for bringing up this key topic, because the survivors have been working on this since they were 16 and 14 and came out of their abuse. Because you need to remember that when they are in that abuse, they are told you have no voice, you have no power. In fact, Epstein told them that. Yeah. I have the government, I have the banks, you have no voice. What they showed us yesterday is that their voice is one of the most powerful because it comes from a place of pain, but also persistence, looking for justice, which I think is the American story. Yeah. Right? The American story is one of overcoming injustice, of seeking freedom, making sure we are all free, we can all have equality under the law. And if you are abused in traffic, women don't have equality. So what they next want is to make sure that those files are protected. As they said last night, no redactions for predators.
But that is, I think, one of the open questions, right? Is the way that Speaker Johnson, in his own kind of about face, and there have been a lot of reversals in the last 48 hours from the White House, from top Republicans on the Hill, his saying that he's concerned about privacy when those survivors have said quite publicly they don't have those same privacy concerns. The idea that maybe the administration opens new investigations to hamper the release of some of these documents. I mean, how are you preparing the survivors and yourself for what that could look like? And are there any ways to compel and make sure that this is actually a full file release?
So there are different ways in which they're going to have to be sort of checks and balances, right? One is the survivors know what's in those files. Yeah. And so their journey, their struggle isn't over because they're going to have to be the truth tellers on this. They're going to be having to do their fact checking if that's not what happened. This is out. This is not there. The release of documents are going to be coming from multiple places. And the act was very important, the Epstein Transparency Act, because that gets released to the public. Whereas what the committee was doing, everything goes to the committee, but the materials that are at the FBI, at the Department of Justice, get released to the public. So in many ways, we are going to have many eyes on this, helping sift through from, the press, which is always key to so many of this work, but then also people who knew about it, looking at it. In New Mexico, we had the Zorro Ranch. It's on my district. I apologize for it. One of the survivors had been abused there. We are doing our own investigation in New Mexico on a state basis. So you're going to have multiple prongs coming at this to try to get to that truth, because they're going to keep hiding it. Right? They did this about face because they knew they had lost those votes. And so I think what they've done is we lost the votes, we lost the momentum. Let's change strategy to try to protect Trump and the other powerful people.
Yeah, this train was leaving the station. I mean, the fact that the White House went over the course of a weekend from pressuring Republican women to take their names off the discharge petition to then saying, oh, actually, no, we'll sign this. We're actually for it. This is fine, is a full recognition of where the politics had been. And it got out way in front of where the White House was comfortable with it being. That being said, there's, I think, another piece of controversial legislation that maybe got a little less attention last week because it happened in the midst of the government reopening. But there was a provision in that government reopening bill from the Senate that you are now trying to repeal and pull back. It would allow senators to sue the Justice Department for $500,000 per time that their phone records were accessed. What do you see in this legislation? And do you think that there's a way to pull this bill out? The Senate doesn't sound keen to do that.
So I call it the Payola Act. It is corruption sort of masked up as legislation. The minute we saw it, the only place that bill came after the Senate was to the Rules Committee. I sit on the Rules Committee. We debated that bill until 2 a.m. because I was trying to strip that out of the legislation, because imagine that. They were unwilling to give tax credits to a father of 5 who's trying to get care for his son, you know, a couple of $1,000s, but they gave themselves millions. 8 senators gave themselves millions that goes directly to their pockets. So I tried to take it out as an amendment. All 9 Republicans voted it down. There was one Republican who voted against the bill because he recognized the corruption.
Greg Steube of Florida.
Yeah, Steube of Florida. They have now, Republicans have introduced a bill to strip it. I've introduced a bill to strip it. My bill is better. And that's because their bill does not address what happens between now and then. Because we've already heard Senator Graham say, you betcha I'm going after that. And it's not going to be for $500,000. It's $1 million.
It's going to be for more.
They could turn that around real quickly. So I want to strip any money that is going to have a clawback provision. Because the public raised such an outcry, because we stayed up until 2 a.m. in the morning fighting about that, the world became aware of it and they are outraged. And so hopefully, like the Epstein files, there's enough public outrage that the Senate agrees to take up that bill. And you're starting to hear Schumer and Thune say, yeah, maybe we'll pull it back.
Well, at least a consideration. We'll keep following that thread as well. Democratic Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez of New Mexico, thank you for getting up early. It was good to see you.